I am about to drive through this puddle so fast. Just kidding. I'm not going to do that. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Varsity Overland channel, and today we are talking about 5 tips for beginners to avoid trail damage and trail misuse. Now, if you live in the Northeast, you know that we have had record amounts of rainfall over the past month or two, and therefore our trails are just a mess. You know, mud, down trees, just everything you could think of. So I figured this is the perfect time to talk about trail misuse. Now, I want to make sure that I point out the terminology. I'm using the word misuse instead of the word abuse, and the biggest differentiation between them is on one side, you know, you're not using the trail properly on purpose, knowingly, and then on the other side, you're not using the trail properly, but simply because you didn't know any better. And I can definitely say that some of these tips that I'm going to go through today, I fell victim to. I did not utilize when I first started this whole overland process 3 years ago. But over the course of time, I've learned a lot. I've become educated on this, and I wanted to make sure that I shared all these tips with you. Now, who am I to share these tips with you? Well, I have had a lot of experience working with the organization Tread Lightly. I helped with a Tread Lightly event, a cleanup event in New York. I have been to a Tread Lightly workshop in Pennsylvania. When I was in Utah, I had to take a Tread Lightly online course in order to go ATVing, like off-roading. And I partnered with Jeremy from AT4 Overland Bound. I'm going to see if I could put that video or that channel up here. AT4 Overland Bound, to do a actual Tread Lightly event here in Connecticut as part of their 50 for 50 state project. So I've worked with Tread Lightly quite a bit. I'm not an expert by any means, but all the tips that you will learn today can also be found on their website. So that's enough jabbering from me. Let's get started with this. Number 1 would be airing down your tires, which I'm about to do right now. So airing down your tires is kind of like a basic practice that you can utilize anytime you go out on the trail in order to minimize damage on the trail. Obviously, airing down also allows you to create traction and increase your ride comfort, but also what it'll do is hopefully prevent your tires from spinning, slipping, or tearing up dirt on parts of the trail that might be more technical. So we want to make sure we keep the trail as pristine as possible when we're using it. And speaking of keeping the trail as pristine as possible, that's going to lead us into tip number 2. So tip number 2 is puddles, or specifically very giant puddles or mud pits or whatever else you want to call them. So when it comes to puddles, specifically really big puddles like this one, you got to be careful, because if you go through them with your entire vehicle right down the center, and if you do it too quickly, what it's going to do is it's really going to tear up all the dirt, basically the mud, everything that's at the bottom of the puddle, and that's only going to get worse and worse and worse, you know, with the more people who come down the trail and fly through the center of the puddle trying to make a big splash and all that kind of stuff. And I get it, it's fun, it looks really cool, because, you know, that's what everyone else does. It's, you go out and you go mudding and you try to make your truck as dirty as possible, and you just fly through all the puddles. And yeah, okay, so I can understand the attractiveness of doing that, you know, wanting to do that. But when you fly through the center of a giant mud pit like this, what you're going to do is you're going to tear up everything that's in the center, because it's very weak, it's very mushy down there. And then over time, this big old puddle is just going to get worse and worse and worse. So that's going to damage the trail, it's going to cause problems, and, you know, eventually it might lead to someone trying to go off trail into the woods, and we'll talk about that actually in a minute. But if the trail is wide enough, like this one right here, where you can avoid the puddle and just go around it, possibly only put 2 wheels on one side, keep 2 wheels dry on the other side, that's going to be a lot better. okay? It's gonna keep the trail maintained. You're not gonna cause any damage. Everyone's gonna be happy. If avoiding the puddle is impossible, go through it at a very maintainable, appropriate, modest pace, something that's not gonna cause a whole lot of damage. And I think we also need to remember that part of our ability to use these trails is knowing that we share the trails with a lot of different people, not just people who are off-roading. There might be bikers on this trail, like bicyclists. There might be hikers on this trail. And so what we're trying to avoid is not just damaging the trail, but also damaging it to the point where, you know, somebody else is going to come by and notice how bad it's gotten and then complain about it. Right? So what happens then, the local authorities will get involved, they'll evaluate it, they'll figure out whether it can be, you know, fixed, whether it needs to be fixed. And, you know, what we really want to avoid is causing an issue that's going to create so much of a problem that, you know, the powers that be just decide, all right, put up the gate, let's close the trail. Now we don't have to worry about it. So I also mentioned, you know, what if you go around the puddle? What if you end up in the woods off the trail? And that is what we're going to talk about next. Now, let's say you're driving along the trail and you come up to a point where you notice that there's an obstacle. And this could be, you know, any number of things. We're talking about maybe it's a big boulder, maybe it's a really washed out section of the trail because of all the rain that we got. Maybe it's like a downed tree or something like that. So you're driving across, let's just picture a big obstacle right here. So what do you do about it? Well, Tread Lightly recommends that you don't go around the obstacle if it means carving a new path off trail. So you never deviate from the trail. Because what happens is you might think to yourself, like, what's the big deal? All I gotta do, I've been driving on this trail for so long, all I gotta do is just do this one little kick around. Yeah, I'm gonna be off trail, but I'm barely gonna be in the woods. What happens, right? What's the big deal? Well, if you do it, you're gonna leave tire tracks or tire marks in the leaves or in the dirt or whatever. Like you just are. It might not be super noticeable, but maybe you do, right? Then the next person comes by. Could be that day, could be the next day, whatever. They see the tree down in the trail. They see your tire tracks or what might look like your tire tracks, and they go, "Oh yeah, somebody just went around it. Somebody made their own trail. Cool." And maybe you didn't know any better. Maybe they didn't know any better, and you just went around it. So we're not judging here, by the way. I just want to point that out. I'm not judging anybody. But you go around it, you end up in the woods, you come back to the trail, everything's great. You keep on with your adventure and don't think another day about it. Well, the next person comes by, they do the same thing. Next person. Couple weeks go by, and all of a sudden you've got this new trail forming through the woods. So why is that a problem? Why is that a big deal? Well, you're disturbing the environment. We have to remember that going off a marked trail is gonna be illegal, you know, and it's gonna cause some issues. But we have to remember that the reason why these rules exist isn't just to ruin your fun time, right? These aren't the fun police. I'm not the fun police. I'm not going to judge you for what you're doing. But all I'm saying is it's for the environment, right? So we have a main trail right here so that we can be here in the woods with our vehicles and enjoy it without disturbing plants and trees and all that kind of stuff. So when you go off trail, you're breaking up everything. You're disturbing the soil. You're disturbing the plant life, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So you got to stay on trail, right? So what if you can't go around it? So what do? It says, Tread Lightly says, go over it. So if it's a boulder, if it's a rock, something like that, if you can do it safely, they're going to recommend you go over it. If it's a washed out section, maybe you have some recovery boards, maybe you've got, you know, something else that can help you out. You're going to try to get over it that way. At the end of the day, if it's too sketchy and you're just not comfortable with going over it, try to turn around. Go back the way you came. Is it inconvenient? Heck yeah, it's inconvenient. You might have been on the trail for an hour, for all I know. But that's just the way it is, right? What if it's a downed tree? Some people like to use a winch to pull it out of the way if it's not too big. Some people like to chop it up with their chainsaw. You got to make sure that you know all those regulations, because, you know, at that point you are touching a state tree, you know, state property kind of a thing, or maybe you're touching someone's private property. You know, that tree might be on a piece of land that belongs to somebody else, you know, because there's a lot of situations where a trail cuts through the woods by state land or you know, national forest land or something, and you know where you are when you're on trail, but as soon as you step off trail, like, this might be private property for all you know. So you got to look around at all the signage, which we will talk about at the end of the video as well. So all I'm saying for this tip is, if there's an obstacle on the trail, your only option is to really either go over it or turn around and go the other way. That way we are not damaging the rest of the environment. All right, now tip number 4. By the way, I'm going to try to do these last two pretty quick because I did ramble a lot on that last one. But tip number 4 is going to be water crossings. So I just showed pretty heavy stream uphill, and then obviously this is a much larger river right here. But water crossings, Tread Lightly recommends the only time that you actually engage in a water crossing is when you literally have to, in order to stay on the trail. So if the marked trail on one side of the river matches up with the marked trail on the other side of the river, and you got to get through the water to continue on trail, then that's when you do it, basically. And you do it under the safest conditions. You don't do it when the water level is too high. You don't do it when, you know, the flow of the water is too strong, all that good stuff. But basically what you're not doing is you're not driving upstream for a long period of time. You are not just kind of like flying through the river or flying through the water for the fun of it, just to see if your vehicle can do it for no reason at all. You literally are only engaging in the water crossing in order to stay on trail, in order to continue towards your destination. Okay, so why is this a thing? Why is this such a big deal? Well, when you go through the water, you go through the river, whatever it is, anything that's currently on your vehicle, mud, salt, sand, all that stuff, chemicals from a car wash perhaps, all that stuff is going to end up in the water. It's going to end up in the river, or if it's a heavy stream that you cross, that stream is going to carry it also into the river. So you want to avoid doing those situations if it's not necessary. Like I said, if you're just continuing on the marked trail and you need to do it, then you do it, okay? You just do it as safe as you can. But otherwise, you don't engage in a water crossing if you really don't have to. This is bad for the environment. You don't want anything that's on your vehicle, whether it be a chemical or whether it just be simple sediment and other stuff from the trail itself, to end up in the river. A lot of that stuff is very fragile. A lot of the environment in the river, in the water, can be very fragile, and you could damage it in ways you can't even comprehend. We can't even comprehend, by depositing certain things into the water. All right, and finally, tip number 5, study your local trail maps and know what your local trail indicators look like when you're out there exploring. A lot of times we can be mistaken when we're out on a trail exploring, you know, anywhere we are. We can be mistaken when we see previous tire tracks, like I said in one of my other tips. So know where the specific trail markers are, know what they look like, know what they mean. There is a difference between, you know, a driving trail and a hiking trail, or just specifically a biking trail perhaps, or, you know, depending on the time of year, there might even be a difference in your state with like a snowmobile trail marker. So know what they look like, and just understand that if you're on a trail and you're driving, and you're not 100% sure, once you stop seeing trail markers at all, you might be in the wrong place. So just understand what your local trail system looks like, understand what those markers look like and what they all mean, and also understand where the private property is. You know, in your state forest, in your national forest, whatever, because you might find markers that you don't recognize, and it could be because they're private property markers. Most of the time people will put up those like posted signs and it'll say private property, but occasionally they don't. So if you're going through a specific area and you start to ruin or start to use someone's private land just because it's really close to public land or it's really close to state land, you know, that property owner is going to have a problem with it. If it happens enough times, they're going to complain, and now you got another closed trail. So, lot to think about here. Remember, I am not trying to be the fun police. I'm just sharing my knowledge, okay? I've learned a lot. I've tried to change my own behavior a lot. You know, there's things that I don't do now that I definitely did once or twice when I first got the truck 3 years ago and I tried off-roading and overlanding for the first time. So I changed my behavior when I learned. Hopefully, you know, if you learn, you'll change your behavior too. And everything can be just amazing and wonderful, and the world is happy, and there's sunshine, literally sunshine. Wow. Sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and all that fun stuff all over the place. So let's treat the trails well. Let's keep the environment clean, and hopefully we'll be able to do this for a long time. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. I appreciate the view. Please leave a comment down below. Tell me what you do to keep the trail healthy, what you do to keep the environment healthy, and if you want to add anything, definitely add something in the comments down below. That's it for this video, folks. I will see you next time. Peace, people.